is the Calvin cycle, or the light-independent reaction of photosynthesis. So, to start with, we have this rubisco enzyme. So rubisco is an enzyme that acts on ribulose bisphosphate and also carbon dioxide. So ribulose bisphosphate is really the starting material that we have, the starting compound that's already present in the cell, and it is a 5-carbon compound, but I don't think it's a carbohydrate. Then we have carbon dioxide, which has come from outside the cell, and carbon dioxide is obviously 1 carbon and 2 oxygens. So the rubisco acts upon both of those, and it uses the carbons and the oxygens to make a 6-carbon molecule. The 6-carbon molecule is really, really unstable, so it almost immediately breaks down into 2 3-carbon molecules, and these are called glycerate 3-phosphate. Okay, so this is how they're made. So as you can see, it needs a ribulose and a carbon dioxide to make those, and 1 ribulose and 1 carbon dioxide makes 2 of those with the help, well, rubisco's already made the 6-carbon one. Actually, it's come from rubisco that's made the 6-carbon one, and now the 6-carbon one contains these 2 things, but basically you just need the carbons and the oxygens from rubisco and carbon dioxide. So we have those. So our 6-carbon compound has now broken down into 2 glycerate 3-phosphate. You don't need to know the name of the 6-carbon compound, I don't think. So each of these has 3 carbons. Now I've done the carbons as different colours just so you can see which ones come from the carbon dioxide and which ones were already part of the Calvin cycle. So which ones came from the ribulose bisphosphate. Now I'm assuming that there is also phosphate in these molecules since it's 3-phosphate and bisphosphate for the ribulose, but those aren't mentioned and they don't really change, I don't believe, so you don't need to know about that. Okay, so as you can see, the blue carbon came from the carbon dioxide. So now we have 2 of these. These aren't actually, they are carbon-containing compounds, but they're not carbohydrates. So these 2 are changed into carbohydrates. So how does that happen? So this is the next stage, and we need 2 extra things to change them. We need ATP, 1 for each, and then we also need NADPH, which is reduced NADP, reduced NADP. So these 2, ATP and NADPH, or reduced NADP, they came from the light-dependent reaction. So that's why the light-dependent reaction was needed. It was needed to synthesize ATP and NADPH. Oh, right. So what happens? So in order to become our products, which are triose phosphate, the glycerate 3-phosphates, if we look at the difference between them, they each need a hydrogen, and the hydrogen is supplied by the NADPH. So it's broken down into NADP and H. They also need, and for this to happen, they need energy, which is supplied by the ATP. So let's see what happens. So the ATP breaks down into what's on the back of the card, which is energy, ADP, and PI. Right? So those are now released from each ATP. Well, they're broken down and the ATPs are gone. And now we have one of those for each molecule. So we don't need the ADP or the PI for this stage, so they can go over there, but they are some byproducts of the process. Okay, so you don't really need to think about those. but we do need the energy. So now the energy is used to combine the H with the hydrogen with each of these two. Now in one book it said hydrogen ion, in the other book it said electron, and in a third book it said hydrogen is added from the NADPH. So I'm guessing it's the electron plus the hydrogen ion, which equals the hydrogen. I think the other ones are all kind of mistakes. In fact, I think the one that said electron later said hydrogen, or later said hydrogen ion. I'm just assuming those are mistakes that they made, which is very common in textbooks. So now in order to get to these, oh yes, we need the GP, which is that. We need the H. Now how do we get the H? So what happens is NADP is broken down into NADPH is broken down, as it shows here, into NADP and H. Okay, so now NADP is gone. There we go. And then this one can go too. And they are replaced, well, they change into NADP and H. So now the NADPs again, we don't really need those. They're not important anymore because they've served their purpose. Well, the NADPH did. And now we need the hydrogens from those. So now we have the hydrogen, the GP, which is that, this is just representing it, and the energy. Alright, so let's keep that. Let's keep those things. Now let's replace this representative GP with the actual GP, glycerate 3-phosphate, and then we can use the carbons and the oxygen from those. So this is what we need to make 1-triose phosphate. So the energy is used to make it, and then it's not clear about what part the energy is used in, but it's just necessary. So let's just say we've used it up now. And then the carbons are added like this. But obviously the bonds aren't all going to break and reform like that. But there we go. Now, so the difference between the reactant and the product was we've now added an H. That's all that's changed. And we can do that for the other one. So it's staying the same apart from the H. And now this is a hydrocarbon, not a hydrocarbon, sorry. Now this is finally a carbohydrate. And this is a sugar, as it says here. This is sugar. These aren't sugars. And they've gone, and that's gone. Okay, so this is what we have, and these are our byproducts here. Okay, so now we have 2-triose phosphate sugars. And they each have 3 carbons and an O and an H. So what happens to these? Well, these are the kind of product that we're trying to make. So we've got that, but we want to convert them into some other things. So they can go to, as it says in some books, useful organic substances such as glucose. So you need 2 of these per glucose to make a hexose sugar. I'll go into that in a moment, but let's go to what we need to kind of reset the cycle. So we don't have in order for the cycle to occur again, we need a ribulose bisphosphate sugar, but we have used all of the carbons from it, so we don't have it anymore. So we need to resynthesize this. Okay. So in order to resynthesize it, as you can see on the back of the card here, we need energy and we need a triose phosphate. We actually need 2 triose phosphates. I don't know, I didn't write that there. Yeah, so we need 2 triose phosphates. Now, what do we actually, so we have 2 triose phosphates, and then we have, where do we get the energy from? We get it from our final ATP. So there are 3 ATPs per cycle. So this ATP, I believe, it will break down into ADP and, inorganic phosphate, and then it goes away, and it releases energy. So these 2 again are byproducts. Now this energy is used to form ribulose. Now let's see what actually we need from the triose phosphates, because we don't need everything from them, which is why this is actually a cycle that makes something, because we don't just get back to the beginning again with nothing changed, because that would be pretty useless. But we have actually added some things. So we've added hydrogen and we've added oxygen, so it's a bit different to the starting materials, and that's what makes the whole difference. So we only need 5 carbons, so we have a carbon left over, and that was the one, or it's not necessarily, but I've just done it as that's the one from the carbon dioxide. And we don't need the OHs either, so we have these other things, and now these aren't used for the ribulose, we've used our energy. So what could these be used for? These hydrogens, oxygens and carbons would then go off into making other useful products or organic substances. So these aren't wasted, these are used for other useful things. Now we've got our ribulose, so that's all good. Now, how do we ever make glucose if we always use the triose phosphate groups to make more ribulose, bisphosphate? Well, it doesn't happen all the time. Every 5 triose phosphate molecules out of 6 go to make ribose bisphosphate. It's a bit easier to say every 10 out of 12 because 5 won't make an even number of ribulose bisphosphate because you need them in pairs. So every 10 out of 12 triose phosphate will go to make ribulose. But then we have, in that 12, we will have 2 left over. And these 2 can go to make glucose. And glucose is C6. So obviously glucose will need a lot more hydrogen. But it does need oxygen, and it does also need hydrogen, and it needs carbon. So these are some starting things, but in order to make glucose we would have to add C6. We would have to add another 10 hydrogens and 4 oxygens. But we're on the way. We're getting there. And so that is the end of the Calvin cycle. So there's another thing you have to do, which I did say about, I did say we need to make you can make hexo sugars from triose phosphate sugars. And in order to make those, for example glucose, like I just said, you need to have 12 phosphate molecules in order to make 1 hexo sugar. So to make 1 molecule of hexo sugar, which is those 2 together, you will need 12 molecules. Now every cycle, as we've just seen, produces 2 triose phosphate molecules. So you need 12 molecules, 2 per cycle. That means you need 6 cycles to make a hexo sugar. And then if you need 4 hexo sugars, you would need 24 cycles. So you can just work it out like that. It's pretty easy. Okay, so that is the end of the Calvin cycle. And